I'd like to introduce a very, very wonderful friend to the World Food Prize and a member of our Council of Advisors, Sir Gordon Conway. Sir Gordon Conway is a professor of international development at Imperial College London, and he is one of the world's most renowned scientists and thinkers on sustainable development. He is trained in agricultural ecology and attended the University of Bangor, Cambridge, West Indies, and California, and UC Davis. He's been a pioneer of sustainable agriculture, developing integrated pest management programs for the state of Sabah in Malaysia. And among the other many reports and conferences he's chaired, he's coming out with a Montpelier report, which he will talk more about, and he will set the stage for the next 2 days of our conference. So please join me in welcoming Sir Gordon Conway. He will make some remarks, and he will then introduce the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bian. The future is about sex, but it's also about diversity. And we bring you a wonderfully diverse panel here to tackle this issue of where we are and where we're going to the future. So I'll introduce the panel in a minute, but I just want to start off by doing a short presentation about where we are and what some of the challenges are into the future. So press that. So it's setting the stage. If we look back, we can see what happened at the time of the Green Revolution. We got massive increases in food production and an increase in per capita food. But that's died away in recent years, the per capita has, of course, in large part due to population increase. And so we're in a situation where we actually do need more food for a variety of reasons. And it's in a context, and this is the context today, of multiple crises: food, water, energy, and so on. And all these crises are building and working on each other. They're more interconnected, creating, maybe in our lifetimes, but maybe in the lifetimes of our children and grandchildren, a perfect storm. There are three interconnected challenges, which I think everybody now is familiar with. We've got rising prices, recurring food price spikes. We've got about 1 billion people hungry. FAO says 840 million, but it's actually probably higher than that. And we've got to increase food production by 60 to 100% by 2050. That's a huge challenge just on its own. And there you can see the food prices going up. And probably the worst statistic at the moment is the fact that 1 in 3 children under 5 are malnourished. And in Africa, it's 40% of children under 5 who are malnourished. And as they're malnourished, they grow up stunted, they may become blind, and they often die. That's a complete blot on our reputations, if you like, of people who are involved in agricultural development of one kind or another. How can this be true still today? And the challenges we face into 2050 include challenges of demand, population, diets, biofuels, challenges of supply, rising fuel prices, climate change, land and water scarcity. The most critical one really is the land and water scarcity. We don't have a lot new land, we don't have a lot new water, we've got some that we can rely on. We've got to take the existing land and produce more food and more agricultural development on it. We have to intensify, in other words, particularly in Africa. Yields are beginning to go up in Africa, but they're still very small. Average yields in Africa are 1 ton per hectare or less of, say, maize or corn. The average yield in Iowa for maize or corn is 11 tons per hectare. That's the gap. Good example of intensification is the orange flesh sweet potato. A great pioneering effort by an African woman, Maria Andrade, who is today's modern Norm Borlaug. She even used some of the same techniques of shuttle breeding to produce varieties of sweet potato in only 4 years instead of 8. But what she really carries, even more than that, something again which is like Norm Borlaug, she's a great breeder, she's also a great implementer, she knows how to get these products out to farmers, and of course she's a great saleswoman. Tremendous saleswoman. You can see, you can only go with her to see the fields if you wear a yellow and orange shirt. So we need intensification, but we need the intensification to be sustainable. We need to produce the same amount on, we need to produce more on the same amount of land or water with efficient and prudent use of inputs, minimize the emissions of greenhouse gases, increase natural capital and environmental services, strengthening resilience and reduce environmental impact. It's a tall order. It's a challenge that is greater by many magnitudes than the challenge we've seen in the past. Precision farming is one answer, where you put fertilizer in a small hole instead of spreading it all over the land. You get less pollution, it's much cheaper, you get higher yields. We can use ecological ways of going forward. We can use genetic ways of going forward. We can use socioeconomic ways of going forward. Each of these has to be sustainable. Conservation farming, which everybody now knows about, is a good example, where you don't till the land, the stalks lie on the land and rot down, increase the structure and quality of the soil, and you simply plant next year's maize or whatever it is in among the stalks that you've laid on the ground. It's a sustainable ecological approach. We also need sustainable genetic approaches, which may be through conventional breeding, they may be through micro-graded selection, or they may be through GM. Most important is to build these capacity to be sustainable and resilient into the seed. Now, this is an example, a gene called a chaperone gene, which allows plants to recover from drought or any other kind of stress. So it's a resilience gene that you're building in. And then we also need socioeconomic intensification. And there the trick is to find associations of one kind or another, whether they're co-ops or anything else, whereby farmers can come together and gain more of the value added. So they're also about value chains, which we're going to be talking about later on. Also included in this is the issue of land tenure, which we're also going to be talking about. And then finally, and that's what we're going to, I hope, end up with, is talking about going to scale. How do we take innovation to scale? I'm optimistic because of what's been happening in Africa recently. We have the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, in which countries are designing new development plans in agriculture. And those plans are being funded. And they're giving countries a great deal of self-confidence about the future. There are real champions in Africa for agriculture. Joyce Banda, the president of Malawi, is one such. So that's all happening. And at the same time, there's a lot of new funding coming from USAID, Feed the Future, coming from European countries like Britain and France, coming from the European Commission, which is a huge funder of agriculture. Also coming from the Rome agencies, which are highly revitalized at this moment. The World Food Programme, IFAD, and FAO. More money coming in now to agricultural development. And finally, of course, the private sector. A great interest in the private sector, both within developing countries and outside, to invest in agriculture. So that's just a little bit of scene setting here. We're not going to tackle all these questions. We can't. But we're going to tackle some of them And that's what this panel is about. So if I introduce you across the panel here, first of all, we've got Tim Hanstad, who is the CEO of Landesa, which is an NGO with considerable experience over the years, I mean, decades of experience of working on land tenure. And that's what he's going to be talking about. Next to him is Kijoolu Kaliya, who's a Maasai woman from Tanzania, who's a local community leader, and she has had a highly successful fight against a takeover of her land by investors from outside Africa. So she's going to talk about what it's like to try and preserve your rights to your own land. And she has a terrific translator with her, Mrs. Missy Salimu of Oxfam. And then we have Claude Fauquet, who is from CIAT in Colombia. Most of you, I think, know about CIAT. He's the director of the Global Cassava Partnership for the 21st century. And he's going to be talking about the development of new cassava, the development of cassava food chains that he's been working on. And then finally, we're coming to Beth Keck from Walmart. And she's spoken here before, and in fact, I've been on a panel with her before, but she's now the Senior Director for Women's Economic Employment. And she's going to be talking again about value chains in terms of Walmart. She's going to be talking about women's empowerment issues as they're addressed by Walmart. So it's a diverse panel and it's a diverse range of topics, but they're all crucial topics to the future. We could continue having more of these panels, and we are going to have more of these panels that carry forward this kind of dialogue into the future. So I'm going to sit down now and I'm going to ask Tim to start off with a few minutes. Each of them are going to have about 4 or 5 minutes to talk about their own experiences. I'm going to ask them some questions, and then we're going to try and have a dialogue. We're going to end up by talking about going to scale, because I think in some ways that's the most interesting of all the things we can say. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gordon, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. And thank you for setting the scene. I guess I'd start by saying I would assert that our food security problems are not primarily production issues. They're primarily about power. And they're primarily about access and rights to resources, and land being most important among them. And if we are going to sustainably intensify, as you point out, on an existing land base, then making sure that land policy and land tenure that defines the rights between the producers and the land is going to become increasingly important. You know, it's a cruel irony that agriculturalists comprise the largest portion of the poorest and most food insecure people on our planet. And for those agriculturalists, their poverty, their productivity, their food security is intimately tied to the nature of their relationships to land. We roughly estimate there are about 1.25 billion poor rural people who depend on land for their livelihoods, but who lack secure legal rights to land. Most of them are smallholders or landless farm laborers. The vast majority of them are in Asia and Africa, and most are women. On the smallholders, just let me address that for a second. I think contrary to the conventional wisdom, a very substantial portion of smallholders in Asia and Africa lack secure land rights. And the uncertainty that creates for them then creates an incentive framework that leads to suboptimal planning and suboptimal situation where they don't have the incentives or the ability to make the long-term investments that might be needed. For landless farm laborers, here this population among the absolute poorest and most food insecure in the world, the vast majority of these in Asia. The threshold issue here is getting access to at least some land, a fraction of an acre at least, enough to have a kitchen garden and maybe raise some animals. And again, within both of these groups, women are the most vulnerable, and of course, as we've heard from earlier panels, increasingly involved in agricultural production, in fact doing the bulk of it in many countries. So women's land rights need particular attention. Now, these land property rights issues are structural issues, and as such they require structural solutions. But the solutions are out there. They're underfoot, and they're often not as politically controversial or as complex as many assume. And those solutions, those land rights system solutions, they're not a silver bullet for food security, but they're a foundational part of the solution, and too often I think we have a blind spot about them. Too often they're either ignored or not recognized as a problem, or kind of put aside even if they're recognized because we think the solutions are too complex or too difficult. And I would say that from Landes's experience in more than 50 countries around the world, partnering with governments to help build and implement policy and legal infrastructure that provides secure land rights to producers, that what we've learned from that is that solutions out there are not only absolutely necessary, but they are present, and I hope we can get into that later.
Thank you, Tim. You know, we've been talking before we came in here, and I suddenly realized that I, like many people probably in the audience, think, oh yes, land rights, they're important. But what you say is that they're not just important, they're a basis for us going forward, and if we don't address them, we're not going to get the intensification of land production that we need. I think the other thing is that we, in the West, we tend to think about land rights in terms of our own land tenure systems. And they're usually either Anglican or Francophone type land systems, and we're used to those. But in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, the land rights are often traditional. They're quite difficult to understand if you're an outsider. I mean, you have experience. How do you cope with land rights that are really very different in their style from those in the West?
Yeah, well, there are no cookie-cutter solutions. I can say that. I can also say that it's never a good idea to export a land system from one country and place it in another, which has largely been done in much of Africa and actually much of the world. And that has actually created problems because you have a system that was designed for a place that had its own complex set of history and politics and social systems on one that's completely different. So what you find in Africa, for example, much of Africa, and then, excuse me for generalizing, is throughout much of rural Africa, customary land tenure systems dominate. You have a formal system that was placed by colonial rulers on top of that, so you have some pluralism. And I think largely what's needed is formalizing the customary systems in some way, is recognizing what the rights are, building off the richness and the strengths of that system, not necessarily adopting it wholesale, because many of those systems don't recognize the rights of women. So it does need some adjustments, but it's not necessarily a Western solution.
That final point that you made about formalizing the traditional systems, I think helps us lead into Madam Kijoolu's experience, because she, as a Maasai, lives in an area, the Loliondo Game Reserve, where they have traditional rights, but those rights were being threatened by a takeover from an outside company from the Middle East. And she has fought an incredible battle to prevent that happening. And so I'd like to invite her to tell us a bit about the battle that she fought.
Kuhusu changamoto tulizozipitia na mfumo mzima wa upatikanaji wenu wa ardhi na uporaji wa ardhi. Karibu.
Asante. Mimi naitwa Kijoolu. Nimetoka Tanzania, Loliondo. naeleza kwa kifupi sana tulivyokumbwa na hali ya mgogoro wa ardhi.
My name is Kijoolu, a Maasai woman from Lolionda, a community leader. I'll just explain in brief the conflict and the battle that we had fought to regain our land rights.
Kwanza natanguliza shukrani kwa sababu ya kuja hapa kueleza migogoro hiyo tulivyopata na tulipofikia.
I'm so thankful. I want to start by thanking all of you for inviting me here to explain and share with you our struggles on land rights and where have we come from and where we are now.
Na ardhi ni uhai, na uhai wa binadamu pamoja na mifugo. Na sisi wa Masai bila mifugo hatuna uhai. Na mifugo bila ardhi ya kuwa na malisho hakuna uhai.
In Maasai community, land is life. Without land, there is no livestock. And without livestock, there is no Maasai community. So land is our lives in Maasai.
Na hiyo ardhi sisi tulitunza kama Wamasai wa Loliondo. Na baadaye tulipotunza hiyo ardhi ikawa kuna wanyama pori na kuna maji, kuna misitu ya kupendeza. Baadaye serikali wakaona kuwa wampe mwekezaji ili awape fedha. Baadaye tukaja kutambua kwamba huyu mwekezaji anachukia kengele za ng'ombe, anachukia inzi wa uchafu wote unaoletwa na ng'ombe.
As part of our tradition, we usually conserve land because we don't eat wild animal, we don't destroy land. So as part of our tradition, land has become very rich and profitable. So we have a lot of wild animals, we had a lot of very green forests, but also we have a lot of water resources. It's out of that the government see the need to bring in private investors to come and invest in our land. Unfortunately, when that investor comes, he feels so annoyed with all the bells that our cow, all the bells from our cow. He feels so annoyed with the tsetse fly because of our cows.
Serikali walipompa huyu mwekezaji hii eneo, ikawa tunaondolewa sisi, mifugo wanaenda kupata njaa, wanakufa, na pamoja watoto wanakamatwa, wanadondoshwa ovyo ovyo kwenye magari, ikatuletea shida sana, na watoto wengine wakapata risasi na tukachomewa maboma.
So out of that struggle, the government decided to push Maasai community out of the land, and our cattle started like losing the pastures. So some of the cattle died, and when our young boys started to fight, then some of them got beaten up, shot down, and most of our houses got burned down.
Tulipochomea hizo maboma, tukaamka wanawake kuwa na mikutano, lakini mikutano ni ya uizi kwa sababu serikali hawaruhusu mikutano bila kibali. Na hauwezi kupewa kibali ya kwenda kumpiga huyo ambaye anakupa kibali. Ikawa mikutano yetu kwa sababu tunanyuma ni ya uwizi usiku na ya sehemu mbali sana.
Because of that, women stood up and we started organizing ourselves to fight this battle. But unfortunately, we've been told that we can't organize. The only way we can organize and meet is until we get the permission from the government. And we know that we want to fight the government. It's not possible for the government to give us a permission to fight them. So we have to organize at the night. We have to have like secret meetings to organize ourselves.
Na tukasema katika mikutano zetu hatuwataki wanaume. Maana mwanamke wa kule Masaini hakuna diwani, hakuna rais, hakuna mbunge, hakuna hata mwenyekiti wa kijiji. Tukasema wanaouza ardhi yetu ni wanaume. Ni aheri sisi wanawake wenyewe tuingie mapambano ya ardhi, hata kama tumekufa, lakini tukibaki, watakaobaki watazalia ardhi imekuwa ni ya kwao.
So we said in all our meetings, we said we don't need to see men, because in our community, none of the women are leaders. Men are the village chairman, councillors, member of parliament, president. So we believe that these men, they have sold our land, and in our struggles, we don't want them because they have been part of the problem. And we said women are prepared. We are prepared to die for our land, and even if we fought and we lost this battle, but we are sure that our children will come and own this land.
Nikiwepo mimi kwa sababu mimi ni mwenyekiti wa wanawake wa mila. Tukawa tunaenda, tumefika Dar es Salaam, tumefika Dodoma, ofisi za chama, mpaka tunahakikisha tupate ardhi yetu ieleweke.
So I am a leader in Maasai community. I'm a chairman of the women Maasai community. So I was there leading every woman, all the women, to travel from Maasai land to Dar es Salaam to fight for our right to land.
Na baadaye kidogo tukaanza kupata tume za serikali zinazokuja kwa ajili ya kuja kuangalia. Na hiyo tume ya serikali ikija, hakuna haki. Wanangangania tu, wanasema hiyo kitu wanakuja kuangalia inapotea hewani, hatujui wamefanya nini.
So from our journey to Dar es Salaam, then we get the special commission was sent to our communities. But when that commission came, they never want to listen to us. They just speak, and every time we're trying to speak, they are not listening.
Na tukasema ya mwisho mawili. Ya kwanza, serikali haina mamlaka, chama ndio ina mamlaka juu ya serikali. Twendeni kwanza tupe kadi za chama. Tukimaliza kama hiyo ikishindikana, twende tukachome kambi ya mwekezaji.
So then we decided that we came to know that potentially the party is above the government. So we said we have to play our last card on the party. So we decided to return all the party. We organized all women to return their party cards to the party that is running the government. And we said when that technique is not paying out, then we are going to destroy the investment from that Arab company.
Na baada wanaume kuona tunasogelea nani migogoro sasa ambaye ni ya kufa sasa, maana kwenda kuchoma sehemu ni kufa na kutupa kadi ni kufa, tukachanganyikana wote na wanaume wetu wa Kimasai. Wakasema tuwafuate wanawake, mbona inaonekana hamna kitu ambaye hamna mtu ambaye amepata madhara.
So when we fought that hard and we get to the position that we return the cards, and then the men were so surprised and said, oh, we should join this, but our women are doing a very great job and they have gone this far, then it's time that we support them.
Na baadaye sasa, kwa sababu nikielezea naweza kueleza siku 5 na nisimalize, lakini baadaye waziri mkuu akaja kwenye mkutano akatuambia, subirini, ardhi yenu mtapata, na kuanzia leo mtapata ardhi yenu, kwa sababu tumeona kwamba mnaendelea kulisha mifugo ndani ya wanyamapori, kwa sababu sisi hatuli wanyamapori, na mwekezaji mtakuwa nao. Lakini sasa ambayo ilikuwa ibaki ile ya kwenda kuchoma kambi ya Mwarabu, lakini tumepewa ardhi yetu na waziri mkuu, isipokuwa hakuna maandishi. Na nilifurahi mimi kuja hapa nisemee, ili kama hapa ni muungano wa nchi zote duniani, ili waweke serikali yetu msukumo tupate hiyo ardhi yetu kimaandishi.
So I'll cut the story short, because if we have to narrate all the details, potentially it might take 5 days for me to narrate all the details. So I'll just end here, but it's important for me to say that we have fought so hard, and at the end of the day, the Prime Minister come to our community and make a declaration that our land will continue to be our land, and it won't be taken away to give to the investor. So I came here, and I'm so honored to be here today to speak about this, and because I know that the audience are coming from very different countries, and I ask you also to pressure our government to make that declaration in a formal agreement, because we know without a formal commitment, potentially there might be another struggle. But so far, the government has declared that the land will continue to be a Maasai land. And I'll end here. Thank you.
It's a fantastic story, and I know that all of us would love to know much more about the detail. Let me just ask you one question. It's a rather personal question. How is it that you were able, as a woman in this male-dominated society, to get to this state of leadership that made a difference? You were, as I understand it, in a position of leadership within the local community, on the school board and so on. How is it you got to be to that state of strength? What lessons can other women learn from you?
wewe umewezaje kupenya mpaka ukawa kiongozi mpaka ukafikia kwenye ngazi hiyo?
Mimi nimeweza kupenya kwa sababu nilianza kuingia serikali ya kijiji, nikaingia kamati ya shule, nikawa naenda kuzunguka naangalia watoto wa shule na hamna mwanaume anayechukia. Alafu kwenye mila za Kimasai pia kuna magrupu kama watu wengi namna hii kama sasa hivi ya kina mama. Kwa hiyo naenda kusimama ndani ya kina mama ambao wana wanaume mpaka nikapata nafasi ya halmashauri na kamati ya shule. Hapo nimepenya na mimi kuelezea kwa sababu kweli sio wote wako hivi.
So what I did is I really, my journey to leadership is started a long way. I first started to build an interest to the school kids, and that the area that men are not interested with. So I went to school, I make sure like who is going to school, who is not in the school. So from that, I get to be in a school committee. After that, I get interest in women's rights. So I go to where women organize themselves. So I know every woman and listen to them so that women also choose me to be their leader. So from there, I start like moving on in the more formal channels.
Okay, thank you. Now let's assume we now... Let's assume we now have good access to land and good rights towards land. The question is, how does that translate into... We then do need the greater production. How does that then translate in the greater production? And Claude, I wonder whether you could say something, probably on the basis of your experience of working in Cassava. I know that's a long way away from livestock in Maasai, but the principles may be the same.
Well, thank you, Gordon. Well, before I talked about Cassava, let me just say a few words that I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy to be here for two reasons. The first one is because this week, tomorrow, we will honor colleagues and scientists that have made major discoveries. And I just completed 25 years of my career translating their discoveries onto cassava. So I'm very happy to tell you that there are transgenic cassava growing in East Africa. And I hope that in 3-4 years from now, we're going to have the first transgenic product farming from their discoveries. So I'm very happy about the fact that I'm here. The second reason why I'm happy to be here is because you gave me the opportunity to talk about cassava. So first of all, I'm sure that many of you have no idea about what cassava is. So cassava is tapioca, if you have eaten tapioca. Cassava is eaten or consumed or used in the world by about 800 million people. It's grown in 105 countries, all tropical countries. So it's a fourth source of calories for humanity in tropical countries. So it's a very, very important crop. And despite the fact that it is very important, it has been very neglected for the last 50 years in terms of research, investment, and development. So I decided with colleagues from SIAT 10 years ago to create a global partnership for cassava. And I've decided this year to embrace this partnership and try to push it to the point where we can help the crop to be more productive. To be more productive for smallholders, because 90% of the production of the cassava in the world is produced by small farmers. Only a very small percentage is produced by huge haciendas in South America. But even in Asia, where you have a very, very high level of productivity, it is produced by small farmers. Okay, so a few words about sustainability of cassava. It is really a food sustainable crop by excellence, by definition, by biology and physiology, for the simple reason that you can leave the food, which is the root part of the crop, underground up to 2.5 or 3 years. So you don't need a freezer, you don't need electricity, you don't need storage, you don't need anything. You just leave the food underground. And this is really one of many farmers are continuing and increasing to use cassava in the world. The second reason, which is more and more important as we are going, is coming from the fact that cassava is already drought resistant. So we have been talking a lot today about changes, climatic changes and so forth. And we all believe that cassava will be the crop of the 21st century for the simple reason that can sustain high temperature, high CO2 level, and a long period of drought. And for all these reasons, we all think, know, and believe that cassava will be very, very more important in the coming decades than it has been important in the past. I would like to give you a few numbers. Today, the world average of production or productivity of cassava in the world is 12 tons per hectare. In Africa, it is 10 tons per hectare. But the potential of cassava is really unknown. It is fairly easy to reach 35 tons per hectare, and in some cases, you can even reach 60, 70, 80 tons per hectare. I can tell you this is true because I have done it when I was in Africa. I grew cassava and I produced 80 tons per hectare. So this is showing you, telling you that there is potential for intensification of this crop in small farmers' land. The world record is India with 36 tons. And in India, cassava is produced by small farmers. So it's not, intensification doesn't mean necessarily to have 10,000 hectares and a lot of machinery. There is room to intensify cassava and probably many other crops on small farm. So that's very important. Now, why do we need a global partnership? We need a global partnership because there is not a voice for this crop. There is not a voice in order to change the current situation, which is very small investment in science and technology, and therefore, if we do not invest, we cannot get the return. I told you it's going to be a fantastic crop for the 21st century, but we also know that we're going to get many more diseases. But diseases of cassava are very important already today, but we know that with increasing temperature, we're going to get more and more and more diseases in the world. So it is clear that if we want to take advantage of this potential, of this formidable potential, at the same time, we have to invest in science and technology, and we have to turn this into product for farmers, and we have to turn this into product for consumers.
Thank you. Let me be provocative. Why is cassava superior to sweet potato? It sounds like maybe we should be investing in sweet potato, not cassava. You should change your job.
Well, I cannot really answer this question because I don't know enough about sweet potatoes, and usually I don't talk about sweet potatoes, about what I don't know. But I can tell you that the reason why cassava has been neglected is because nobody saw a future in the crop. Nobody saw enough of a future to invest. It has been considered like a poor man's crop, and even president in African countries, at least until recently, did not consider cassava as having a real potential for justifying investment. This translated into the international research system, where we have not completely neglected, but compared to cereal, for example, the investment has been very minor. Now, you're going to see Friday morning the Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria talking about what he is doing in Nigeria, and cassava is a big item in Nigeria. By the way, Nigeria is the first producer of cassava in the world, with about 50 million tons of cassava produced per year. So you will see that I'm not the only one having a vision of using cassava for potential development in Africa. You will see this Friday morning as well.
You should look forward to hearing the Minister of Agriculture. He worked with me for 7 years, and so I know he's going to say some really good things. So you're producing all this cassava. It needs to be marketed. Now, Beth, this is one of your challenges. How do you take greater production that comes forward from small farmers in particular? How do you use that in the supply chain? How do you make supply chains work? And in particular, of course, how do you ensure that women get the benefits from this production? Whole gang of questions there.
I was just thinking, Claude, that we probably need to team up with you on cassava, because if you have the crop of the future, we of course want to be ahead of trend in terms of getting crops to our customers, or food to our customers. Let me just step back and just give a little bit of perspective here on Walmart and how we fit into this. Just getting ready for this morning, I went on the web and I looked at the World Wildlife Federation's website. And they do something that I think is really very powerful. They've gone out and they figured out how much this earth can produce, and then how much we are consuming. And today, we're consuming about 1.5 capability of our earth already. So we're over consuming. And so as of today, right now, we are something like 57 days beyond our planet's means. So we're living 57 days beyond our planet's means as of this day in October. So we've exceeded what we should be doing. And that's really critical, we think, from a Walmart perspective, from everyone's perspective, because we need to get this in balance. And so that's why we really have gotten behind sustainable agriculture, because we realize that there has to be this balance of social, economic, and environmental aspects as we move toward this greater production that's needed. So we took commitments in 2010 behind this, and they're all on our website. I don't need to go into those right now. But basically, behind those commitments was actually supporting livelihoods of farmers, large and small, working with our supply chain so that there be more production with fewer inputs and less waste. And then in terms of our own practices of having sustainable sourcing practices to back that up. We then have layered on with that our own commitments on women's economic empowerment. And so we have a commitment to double the spend of what we are selling in our stores that comes from women-owned businesses, and this includes women in agriculture, as well as training 1 million women, nearly 1 million women over the next 4 years. And so we're putting a lot of focus on this gender mainstreaming, as was discussed in the first panel, as we're working on our other issues in our company. So I owe you an update. I was here 2 years ago on this panel, which was pretty much right after we had announced our sustainable agriculture commitments. And I showed a slide of a really dynamic young woman that I had met in Costa Rica. Her name is Jessica Obiede. And she was working in one greenhouse and trying to get that greenhouse operation turned around so that she could be supplying some vegetables to our stores in Costa Rica. And when I visited her that fall in 2011, she had gotten to the point where she was producing about 2,000 units of hydroponic lettuce per week that we were buying. And I'm just really thrilled. One of my colleagues who's here with me, Chris Cochran, he was on her farm just last month. She now has 3 greenhouses in operation and is thriving. And that is a concrete example of how we bring to life these commitments for women, women in our supply chain, and also small farmers as well.
Thank you. There's a lead into the questions I'm going to ask, but before I do that, it always seems to me that in many cases we start with a particular project or a program that it gets designed by an African government or a foreign government or whatever. And it's often focused around increasing yield or production of nutrients or increasing income. And then we suddenly think, oh, we've forgotten about women, and we add gender into it. We then usually say, oh, we've forgotten about environment, and we add environment into it. Now, how do you manage to start from the beginning by having these add-ons, not as add-ons, but built into your programs?
I mean, that really is the transformation that's been happening in our business for the last 7 years. And we did begin with the environmental aspect, because you do start somewhere. And it was a little daunting to us to try to take everything at once. But as we've moved through this process, it really is now becoming much more of an integrated conversation inside our company for our sourcing practices, no doubt about that. And it really comes from necessity. For example, you start with where you start, and it's not perfect, but it is a great starting point. So, for example, when we started out with the smallholder idea, we thought, we're going to find all these smallholders in our produce supply chain. And so then what that did is it made us look at our produce supply chain, and we discovered that we didn't have 1 million smallholder farmers there. No way would we meet our public commitment. That then was a very strong forcing mechanism to make us look at other parts of our business. In this case, we expanded it to our house brands, our private brands. And then we sat down and we said, okay, where are the smallholders in that supply chain? And that has really broadened our levels of activity, because we discovered that It was in cotton in China, India, and Pakistan, to be specific, because we sell a lot of sheets and pillowcases and clothes. And then we also realized that there were other crops that were important to us as well, like actually apples may be a surprise to you, but 40% of the world's production of apples happens in China, and a lot of those apples turn into apple juice that we sell at Sam's Club and Walmart. So we have this interdependency on these smallholders in China for apple juice that we sell here in the United States. And so just mapping and starting to look then starts guiding actions.
Everywhere you go in Africa, you can see innovation on the farm, in the district, in the county. Hundreds of examples of innovation. And the question that we all face is, how do you actually take those innovations to scale? I'm going to ask each of them to say that before we finish, to say what they've got to say about going to scale. Tim, you may want to talk about China here, but maybe not.
Happy to.
Okay, talk about China, because that's a near success story.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting. We're talking about addressing food security, addressing poverty alleviation, whatever it may be. We certainly can't ignore China. I mean, the most successful achievement in human history, whether it's by food security or addressing poverty, has happened in our lifetimes in China over the last 35 years. And it started, it really built on a foundation of tenure reform. I mean, it was changing a collective farm system into a family farm system that was done for almost 200 million households in the course of 3 years in the early 80s, that started things going and led to huge increases in agricultural production, and subsequently China's economic miracle kind of built on that. But it started in rural areas, and it started with land changes, or land tenure changes. Now, China's not all the way there yet. I mean, Chinese farmers now, for the most part, have 30-year use rights to land. Of the 200 million households, about half of them have those legally documented, so they're about halfway in that process. Those rights aren't always strong enough to protect them from local government expropriation, so they still have a ways to go. But those changes, which happened at scale, and the thing about land rights changes is they, at least the way Landesa approaches it, and I think it's the government has to make these changes, and typically they start with legal and policy changes, and then of course that have to be implemented. So you have to almost think about scale from the very beginning. But there, China, we see the differences between farmers who have those legally documented secure rights and those who don't in terms of investments they make in their land is astonishing. So it's not just that it creates the incentive and the ability to make the long-term investments that are needed. And by the way, as the consumption patterns change from grain-based to fruits and vegetables and animal-based, you typically need long-term investments on the farm in order to adjust to that. And we've seen that remarkably in China.
And part of the success comes from leadership at the top in this case. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly required some initial legal and policy reform and leadership at the top. Actually, the story in China was, it's a little more bottoms up than what I think the Chinese history tells, but the leadership at least allowed for innovation to happen. And once they allowed for that innovation to happen, it spread wildly, and the leadership at least blessed it.
Madam Kijoolu, yours is an example of very much from bottom up, if you like, of change. To what extent are other Maasai communities following your leadership? To what extent have you got an impact on other Maasai or even other non-Maasai rural communities from your activities? How are you influencing them?
Unawezaje kuhakikisha kwamba linaenda watu wengine nao wanafuata jamii za Kimasai, hata jamii zisizokuwa za Kimasai? Unahitaji mabadiliko kwenda juu.
Mpaka sasa hivi hatujaishia hapo ninapozungumzia. kuna wakina mama wa Kimaasai ambao tunajenga uwezo wa kuweza kulinda ardhi yetu, kuweza kuongea kwenye mikutano, pia na kuweza kupambana na umaskini. Tuna vikundi mbalimbali, kuna kikundi cha wafugaji ambayo tunaita ushirika wa wafugaji. Tunayo SACCOS, tunayo vikundi vingine vya kusunguzishana hela, tujenge nyumba za bati kama hizi, kwa sababu nyumba zetu ni zile za kujenga na miti na kukandika na kinyesi cha ng'ombe. Kwa hiyo sasa hivi sijaishia hapo, nilivyoongea hivi sema ni muda tu ndio kidogo, kwa sababu tunajaribu kama mwenyekiti wao kuendeleza vikundi hizo ambayo tunafanya nayo kazi.
My leadership has not just been limited to the struggles on land, but also I really take the opportunity to organize and be inspiration to the other Maasai women. And for example, we have established different Maasai groups. We have livestock keeping groups, cooperatives. We have now establish credit and savings. So for example, what we want now is to build the concrete houses like this for women, because traditionally Maasai have a very temporary kind of housing. So we are moving forward and we are inspiring other Maasai communities, but the group outside Maasai.
Thank you. Claude, have another comment, madam.
Tunaita ushirika wa wafugaji. Tunataka wao wahame kupeleka mradi wao pale mwekezaji alipo, ili tukatafute mifugo wa kuboresha mifugo zaidi, ili yule mwekezaji anayekuja anachukia kengele, ndio tunaweka kengele, tunaweka madume wakubwa, kama anachukia aende, kama anapenda habaki.
So in our livestock keeping group, we wanted really women to have a lot of cows and a lot of cattle, and we want them to keep them close to these investors, so that if these investors get annoyed, he has to leave, and Maasai women take over.
Thank you. Good. We need to go on. Claude, when you think about what you're doing with Cassava, how are you building in from the beginning of this the notion of going to scale, so that when you've got marvelous new cassava varieties and marvelous processing techniques and everything on the farm, how do you get that to happen at the community level or at national level?
Thank you. But before I answer your question, I would like to link the previous two questions with cassava. I mean, the importance of the human factor, first of all, for any crop probably, but cassava in particular. One of the failures of breeding in Africa is or was coming from the fact that we have ignored too much the human factor. And when human factor, you're talking about human factor by cassava, you're talking about women, because farmers will decide if you're going to grow this variety or this variety. Before they're going to decide, they're going to give the roots to their women, and the women will process the food, and they will tell you, don't bring me this anymore because this is just water, I don't want it. So there is a very important factor at the family level, but women are very important in the decision-making process for the farmers to choose if we're going to grow this or that. Now, in the term of science, we ignore or bypass this too much because probably we felt it was too complicated. I don't want to give you a course of cassava genetics, but it's a very complicated crop in terms of crosses and etc. So it was ignored, and therefore we missed opportunity. So what we are doing now, we are taking this in consideration again. We are going back to farmers to inquire about what the needs are really in order to integrate this into the breeding system. Now, the second question about innovation is really illustrated also for cassava by the fact that, for example, now with genomics of cassava and what we call genome-wide selection that we can apply. Now, for genome-wide selection, this could not be done without genomics. And because we invested into genomics of cassava, now we can use this technology. And this technology can take into account not only virus resistance or yield or different components, but we also can take into account you know, the processing qualities, the cooking qualities, this sort of thing that we could not even consider in the past. So this is really showing the link between, you know, the human factors, the human determination about, you know, what's needed, what's required in order to improve, and science and technology that can help and shortcut the system. Now, to come back to your last question, what are we going to do if we are in a position where we have 30 tons of cassava per hectare in Africa everywhere? Well, first of all, we are not yet there, so it's going to take some time. We'll have time to think about it. But to be serious, what we propose right now, the philosophy of GCP 21 is to look at exactly this question is, at the same time that you invest in science and technology, and you have to do your best possible investment, at the same time you also need to look at what do you do with this increased productivity. And as a matter of fact, in 2 weeks from now, we'll be in Nigeria to talk with the Ministry of Agriculture and scientists and developers and feed makers, etc., to figure out what can we do. The minister is putting in place a huge program that will produce even more cassava and more waste of cassava. How can we use this to turn this into something useful? So the answer is making feed for animal. Now, deciding to make feed for animal, it's not a decision of scientists or developer or even a minister. It's a decision of the community involved, from using this material to the development and the system, and this will involve the private sector, the producers, the consumers, and the scientists. So we promote, as this partnership, we promote this type of discussion at the same time that we promote investment of, you know, hardcore science.
Beth, it seems to me that one of the problems of getting farmers in value chains is that progressively the value goes up the chain to the supermarket or whatever, rather than increasing at the bottom of the chain. How do you deal with that?
The way we look at this is we really look at efficiency and how you can make a value chain more efficient. So if we take Jessica, our farmer in Central America, she's benefiting from a business model that we invested in, where we are basically buying directly from her and giving her direct market signals and having a long-term relationship with her so that she knows that she can invest in that next greenhouse and that next greenhouse. And so it's very much having these long-term relationships that are key.
Thank you. We've come to the end of our time. I'm going to... Claude's comment reminded me of the great Borlaug story, when Norm took all these seeds from Mexico up through to Los Angeles and then across to India. The first harvest was so great, they closed the schools and stored all the grain in the schools. And that's what one means by an agricultural green revolution. I'm just going to say three things and we're finishing. First of all, those of you who are interested in talking more about sustainable intensification, we have a side event on, at 7:30 tonight in the Cedar Bluffs, what is it? What? Cedar Rapids room, just along the way. This is a very diverse group, but in a sense, we've encapsulated in this diversity some of the key issues that we need to go forward. We need to get land rights right. We need for poor farmers throughout the world to have proper access to land. When they have the access to land, then with science and technology, they can produce far more food, far more agricultural products. And then there's the potential for companies like Walmart and elsewhere to come in, and other companies, to come in and provide sustainable, fair markets for what they're producing. So even though we're a very dispersed group, a disparate group, we've brought all these elements together as a basis for going forward. I'd like to thank the panel enormously, and of course what you realize about them is that they're disparate, but in one sense they're all united, and that is a huge passion for what they do. Thank you all very much.